Hello, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church live stream worship service here at Accotink. I'm Rev Alexa Fraser, and I am happy to be leading worship today. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world through our actions to bring about justice and by honoring the web of nature of which we are all a part. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You are welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or background, no matter your means or abilities. You are welcome here in this religious community. Welcome home. We also welcome the ancestors and descendants. We welcome the people who made each of us, the biological ancestors, spiritual ancestors, teachers, and guides. We welcome those who imagined and made our congregation possible. We welcome the ancestral people of this land and recall that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahawk tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing with the people of this land whose bodies and spirits live on in their descendants. Many who are members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Potawatomi Indian tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move forward towards healing so that all the descendants together shall one day know full justice. With this, let us welcome the longings and hopes of all the descendants that we might live for them today. I'd also like to mention that today's service is adult themed. Parents, you might want to be thinking about that. I now invite John Long, our worship associate for today, to continue our welcome.
If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please feel free to reach out to me, to our minister, Rev Alexa, or to a member of the board. Contact information is posted on our website at www.accotinkuu.org. On our website, you can check the online order of service on the worship search section of our webpage. And while you're there, be sure to check out our events for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. I now invite you to close your other windows or apps and devices, take a deep breath, and center yourself for worship. Our chalice lighting today is by Rev Rebecca Savage. Spirit of life, spirit of love, we've gathered under the banner of a shared faith. We are born of a welcoming grace that extends and receives love. We are touched by the ways we have fallen short of who we should strive to be. And here we are reborn, forged by a greater courage. Today we have a call to worship by Rachel Kahn, written in November of 2016. And the title is What to Tell the Children. Tell them that this is a great awakening. Tell them that we humans have made some huge mistakes, and that's how we now find ourselves in this tenuous place. Teach them that hate is the poison. Teach them that love is the remedy. That it is better to be readied for what comes next, even if the revelation is painful. Tell them that this is the paradigm shift, that the old is collapsing on itself, that this death rattle is simply a temper tantrum, the last gasp of a dying Goliath. Tell them that everything is not okay, and knowing that is okay. Tell them that pretending that what is unacceptable is fine is what got us into this sick and dysfunctional spot on the timeline. Apologize for any poor attempt to teach them denial. Tell them you were blinded by desire for comfortable numbness. Express that you had the best intentions, that you are working within a broken system where a few benefited at the expense of many, that you laid low, kept to the status quo, obediently played your role. But those days are over because now you know better. Tell them they have no responsibility to follow someone blindly based solely on a title. Teach them to practice discernment. Tell them authority and respect must be earned and not inherently deserved. Teach them that there are good people and bad people from every background, ethnicity, and belief system. That they must align themselves with kindness. That there is no more time for divisiveness. You tell them that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. You tell them to stand up and fight. Remind them all of all the lawful atrocities committed in the sick and twisted history of this violent country. That Rosa Parks righteously broke a law and the world took notice. That Harriet Tubman is our modern day Moses. That women would not be allowed to vote and no one would have proposed another notion if the blessed rebels hadn't taken a stand. Tell them love will win this war, but only if we remember that love is not just one unending cuddle puddle, but fierce as a mother bear protecting her cubs. Tell them that although this existence is damaged beyond repair, they must not despair. There is possibility, and we are willing and willfully open ourselves to new ways of being, because the old way is not working, has never worked, and the world deserves better. And we're worth it. Tell them they are not free while another suffers under enslavement. Teach them that we are all limbs on one body, and we cannot chop off our own arm without deep suffering. Teach them humility. But also to learn to trust their institution and beg their forgiveness, to trust their intuition and beg their forgiveness for unintentionally misleading them previously. Tell them their gifts are useful. Tell them they are beautiful. Tell them they are the truth.
Today's service covers a good number of themes, which some parents may want to listen to without kids involved. So it's probably a good time to don earphones if you want to do so. The 4th of July is the right time, a good time, any time is a good time to think about US history. The date, of course, commemorates the founding of our nation, seminal documents, all the things that we know well, though, of course, much history happened before that time and after. The recent acknowledgement of Juneteenth by making it a national holiday makes an appraisal of our history even more timely. But you know, what's really going on for me in this sermon was the rejection of the academic subject of critical race theory by many in our nation. So there you have it, American history on a national holiday focused on our history. Critical race theory evolved in law schools, particularly Harvard Law School, where it focused on the systematic ways that law was enforced to continue to squelch Black Americans' power. CRT explored how racism manifests through itself through complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics. It mostly isn't focused on explicit and intentional prejudice on the part of individuals. The American Bar Association says CRT is not a diversity or inclusion training, but a practice of interrogating the role of race and racism in society that emerged in the legal academy and spread to other fields of scholarship. Interrogating, let me just say, is an academic way of understanding something by asking hard and formal questions about it. So as Kimberly Williams Crenshaw writes, one of the documenters of that theory, CRT emphasizes that merely making laws colorblind on paper may not be enough to make the application of the laws colorblind. Ostensibly colorblind laws can be applied in racially discriminatory ways. Along the way, CRT has explored our nation's history vis-a-vis race. CRT keeps its gaze on the systemic, that is, the systems that empower white Americans at the expense of Black Americans or those with multiple identities. Examples would be differential punishments for possession of crack cocaine versus powdered cocaine, or differential policing and arresting and conviction rates in predominantly Black communities from those where white folks live. Or differential paroling rates applied to people of different races, though in fact the rules may state that they are based on crack versus cocaine. You loop back around and you get to the implicit discrimination embedded in the original law and the initial crime. CRT focuses on how the social construct of race and institutionalized racism created and perpetuated a racial caste system where people of color are always in the bottom tiers. And so importantly, CRT also recognizes that race intersects with other identities, including sexuality, gender identity, and more. CRT recognizes that racism is not a bygone relic of the past. Instead, it acknowledges that the legacy of slavery, segregation, imposition of second-class citizenship on Black Americans and other people of color continues to permeate the social fabric of this nation. You get it. We've been talking about systemic, that is system-wide, system-reinforced, and system-created racial injustice for a long time. But some want to reframe CRT into something that it isn't. Examples of intentionally wrong-headed things that some are saying about CRT include this from Republican Senator Glenn Grothman, who recently said that though the critical race theory curriculum, through that, students are being taught that they are defined by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. What a jab. Who said the content of your character is what should define you? Martin Luther King. This fellow is turning it around and using it in exactly the opposite way than it was intended. He goes so far as to call CRT a neo-racist ideology. Wow, how did we get from a study of history, including our nation's past wrongs, to statements like those? One reason, maybe the most important reason, is that Fox News has mentioned CRT over 1,300 times between March and June 15th. How many more times did they incorrectly describe it as radical and divisive in the 2 weeks since June 15th, slightly over 2 weeks? Who knows? We do know that teaching history accurately is what allows us to do better, learn from our mistakes, and educate all of our kids to be better citizens. But some folks, like Groman, suggest that an accurate retelling of American history is divisive. I call this simple truth-telling. Yet nearly half of all states are taking measures to ban CRT from public schools, and 8 have already enacted bans on accurate teaching of American history. But it's simple truth-telling. So now I'm going to tell some truths. Let's go back to the Revolutionary War, the war that modern celebration of the 4th of July celebrates. Yes, it was a war of liberation for white residents of the original 13 colonies from the colonial power of Great Britain, but it sure did nothing for Blacks in those colonies. In fact, one of the more obscure lines in the Declaration of Independence spoke about King George II as exciting domestic insurrections amongst us, which references King George's offering freedom to slaves who joined the British Army. There you have it wrapped up in our seminal document, the Declaration of Independence, the holding of slaves as key to our national formation. Frederick Douglass gave a speech in which he famously said, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasts liberty and unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sound of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious pride and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. And we understand why Douglass said that. We all know that Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States declared that any person who was not free would be counted as 3/5 of a free individual for purposes of determining state representation. The 3/5 clause thus ensured the political power of slaveholding states. But do we also know that the newly formed United States of America government paid some Revolutionary War soldier with enslaved people? I didn't know that, and it hit me hard. It gives a new meaning to the debate over reparations. And of course, All of that is in addition to the genocide of Native Americans that occurred at that time. And so slavery continued, grew, and thrived, and became all the more horrible as the ways that so-called slaveholders could exploit slave labor to become more and more profitable. Eventually, the Civil War was inevitable. Around here, Virginia, where you live, the South, there's a fair amount of talk about the lost cause. It's taught, or was until recently taught, in some of our school systems. The lost cause is the mythical and pseudo-historical narrative that says the cause of the Confederate States during the American Civil War was heroic, just, and not centered on slavery. The myth was an attempt to recast the Confederacy as something tied to family, loyalty, heritage, rather than what it was, a traitorous effort to extend the bondage of millions of Black Americans. The myth asserts that the Civil War was fought by honorable men protecting their communities and not about slavery at all, that slavery wasn't that bad, and that the Civil War was about states' rights, not the injustice of slavery. But when I've talked with lost cause advocates, they can't come up with a single states' right issue that was abridged by the Union other than the holding of slaves. The lost cause theory is advocated in schools and in broad culture, and always by the sons of the Confederate veterans and the sibling organizations, the daughters and children of the Confederacy. When I was the interim at the UU Church of Lynchburg, Virginia, there was a lost cause statue put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy, honoring Johnny Reb outside our door. That statue is still there. And of course, talking out the other side of their mouths, Southern leaders regularly said that slavery was the cause of the war. One Mississippi lawmaker said, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world." Mississippi lawmakers declared during their 1861 secession convention, slavery was the immediate cause of the late rupture and present revolution. The Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens added that the Confederacy was founded on the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, and leaders in every seceding state cited the same cause for war. And after the war, we never properly discredited the Confederacy as a traitor government, and instead have allowed the symbols and rhetoric of the Old South to flourish in violent and historically inappropriate ways. I think anybody should be able to name these historic truths, but perhaps I, as a person whose mother enrolled me as a child of the Confederacy, as a young child, can say these things more stridently than some. I am a person whose ancestor was a senator in the Confederate government, a person whose ancestor not only held slaves, but also held his sons in slavery. I have to say these things. And now we get to Juneteenth, the day on which enslaved people in Texas were notified of their freedom, though it had been granted by President Lincoln 2.5 years earlier. An eternity, 2.5 years. Who was flogged or maimed or sold away from their family during those years? Who was outright killed for fleeing for their freedom or some other infraction? We don't know, but we do know those 2 years were just one more example of a time when Black folks were told to wait, a time when Black Americans were told, no, it isn't your time yet, be patient. Indeed, going back to the 1963 March on Washington, John Lewis said, "To those who have said, be patient and wait, we have long said that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now." He then linked Black Americans' freedom to the American Revolution. I appeal to all of you to get into the great revolution that is sweeping this nation. Get in and stay in the streets of every city, every village, and every hamlet of this nation until true freedom comes, until the revolution of 1776 is complete. Or Reverend Martin Luther King, talking in 1967, talked about the fierce urgency of now. Because, things can move fast or slow as those in power want them to. The passage of the Juneteenth bill was pretty fast. It was introduced in February of this year and passed in June of this year. But, Congress and the Senate approved a Juneteenth bill, but not an anti-lynching bill. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act hasn't passed in 3 years of being stalled in the Senate. Why is that? Perhaps because too many people believe in the lost cause. Too many people don't know of our nation's history of racialized terror and lynching. Doesn't all the hoopla about critical race theory and some people's determination not to teach actual US history in US history class remind you of the rejection of evolution in some of our school systems? The rejection of honest study about our nation's history is just as damaging and wrong-headed as is teaching intelligent design as an alternative to teaching evolution. Leslie Mack is a queer UU leader who is one of the founders of Black Lives of UU, also known as Blue. She recently wrote an article entitled "Finding and Losing Juneteenth." It was in the News One online magazine. She is excited about the emergence of Juneteenth as a holiday, yet she points out that whiteness will always position acknowledgement and understanding as progress. Corporations get to act woke by closing for Juneteenth, a move that will certainly benefit more white people than anyone else. Politicians get to make annual proclamations of support for Black Americans while they do nothing to meet the needs of those same Black people. We simply deserve better than this, she says. By better than this, she demands that when minority healthcare workers need protection, they get a lot more than a generic round of applause at 6 p.m. every day. She demands more than a painted street, even if it is in front of the White House and does say Black Lives Matter. She demands that the police stop killing Black people. She names that substantive action is the only pathway to truly moving forward. We could talk about Reconstruction, voter intimidation, suppression, Jim Crow, the school to prison pipeline, and more, and some other time, I'm sure we will. We could talk about redlining and school redistricting and segregation and more, but today we are talking about critical race theory and why telling the truth about our history is essential. Isn't that a good project for the 4th of July? I think so. So on the one hand, we have this truncated, inaccurate, and self-serving view of history taught in many schools and broadly endorsed by our culture. And on the other hand, we have critical race theory, the exploration and telling of honest, thoughtful, critical history of the US. Even Army General Mark A. Miley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says about critical race theory, what is wrong with understanding the country we are here to defend? Meg Riley, a longtime UU minister, and some of you may have seen her recently as the moderator at General Assembly. She is a mentor of mine. She asks, how on God's great green earth is CRT controversial? If this is what I'm being accused of, then hell yes. I could not be more relieved and grateful than to be part of a faith community where interrogating the role of race and institutionalized racism is a central spiritual practice, understanding the interactions with other identities. I recognize the incredible contributions and sacrifices made by biopic UUs to get us to this point. I can only imagine with longing who we might be if we actually created the brand new world which critical race theory could help us realize. She goes on to say, though I've never called it critical race theory, the practice of interrogating how institutionalized racism is permeating every aspect of life is saving my soul and could save the souls of many other white people. If we are willing after interrogation to relinquish power, we should never have had to try something different, something more compassionate and just. We who are white have been systematically trained not to recognize racism at the expense of our hearts, minds, and spirits. Why on earth wouldn't we want to change that? Isn't the purpose of religion to grow a soul? And so I ask you, friends, isn't the purpose of religion to grow a soul? Amen, Ashe, and blessed be. So how does change happen? How do people not only learn their history, but let that change them for the better? Again, parents, I remind you that this is an adult-themed service. And you know me, I'm a crier. It doesn't mean I'm weak. It just means that I feel. I know I'm going to cry as I read this. But it is our job to not only observe and educate ourselves, but also to look for ways to change. So here is a story built out of a series of tweets by Kenny DeForest at Kenny DeForest from June 3rd, 2020. Kenny DeForest is a white stand-up comedian. He is writing about Dave Chappelle, a Black stand-up comedian. When I went to seminary, I did not anticipate quoting two stand-up comedians in a sermon, ever. I've edited this Twitter feed just a bit for clarity and brevity, and also to diminish the number of curse words. I haven't taken them all out, but at least some. So Kenny DeForest writes, my coolest night of comedy was when Chappelle dropped by at comedy at the Knit when I was hosting, and it was an open mic. I texted another comedian who knows Dave well, like, any chance Dave wants to go up? We started the show thinking he might come. A couple of comics in, he sneaks in like a boxer with his hood up. We're in the green room smoking, drinking, and joking. The dude is a machine. Every topic that came up, he has something profound for. We bring him up last. The crowd loses it. He was asking the crowd for headlines to riff on. They toss one out, he riffs a joke. Every topic he immediately had a perfect joke for. Now, this was the day in the days after the cop that choked Eric Garner to death in Staten Island, you know, murder, was not indicted by a grand jury. Protests, etc., were all over the city. Tensions were high. About 15 or 20 minutes into his set, he asks for another topic, and someone shouts, police brutality. He pauses and then says, you really want to do this? Okay. He chugs his Tecant and sets it down. Our crowd was always beautifully mixed. A clearly privileged white girl, she had a wide-brimmed felt hat for Christ's sake, shouts, life's hard, sorry about it. And it takes the air completely out of the room. A collective gasp. Chappelle zeroes in on her. What did you say? She repeats it. Chappelle starts going in. He starts educating the crowd on the history of Black people and the police. He talks about slave patrols and Rodney King and Watts and Emmett Till and Black Wall Street. He talked about Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and he talked about John Crawford III. I don't know if you remember John Crawford III, Google it. It happened right around the time of some higher profile killings, but it is as awful as anything you'll see. He was on the phone in Walmart and picked up a BB gun that was for sale in said Walmart and was just looking at it. Some scared cracker called the cops, and this officer comes in, doesn't even bother saying drop the weapon or hands up, and just guns him down. The security footage makes it plain as day. The footage will make you sick, disgusting and outrageous in every conceivable way. Then Chappelle tells a story about getting pulled over in rural Ohio where he lives. This is before the Crawford shooting, but after Ferguson, so racial tension is bubbling. He says, I may be white on paper, but I am still Black, so I'm nervous. He says, the cop approaches and he can tell I'm nervous. I have both hands on the wheel and I say, officer, my license and registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. I promise I'm not armed. I could tell the officer was offended that I was nervous. He said, I know who you are. You are Dave Chappelle. And I said, so why do you need my license and registration? He gets off with a warning. The twist? The same cop would go on to murder John Crawford III. His takeaway, I shouldn't have to be Dave Chappelle to survive police encounters. He goes on to explain that one of his best friends is South African. He said, I asked him what it was like in South Africa right before apartheid ended, and he said it was chaos in the streets. There were riots and car bombs, etc., but the amount of people caring hit critical mass, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The people had momentum and apartheid ended. Critical mass, that's what we have to hit. Once enough of you care, there will be nothing they can do to stop the change. It was incredibly powerful. The crowd was somber and silent. After the show, we're in the green room. Someone comes back and says, that dumbass white girl wants to talk to you, but I told her you were busy. And he goes, no, bring her back. So she leaves and comes back with the wide brim hat girl and her friend. Hat girl is humiliated, and her friend even more so. Hat girl speaks first. I just want to say I'm sorry for what I said, and thank you for educating me. I was ignorant before, but I want you to know I learned from you tonight, and I won't say things like that anymore. Chappelle responded, you're okay. That's all we can ask. Know better, do better. I want to thank you for hearing me and listening. That's your role. And now that you know, now that you're a part of that critical mass we talked about, and next time you hear a friend say some ignorant stuff like, you said, it's your job to correct them and share with them what you learned tonight. Then you are no longer a part of the problem. You are part of the solution. She starts crying and he pulls her in for a hug. It's okay. You're part of the solution now. Do you want a picture? She says, really? And he says, of course. Friend, get over here for a picture. The friend approaches and they take photos. He hugs them both and reiterates that it's okay and just to be part of the solution. And he sends them on their way. Class. I couldn't believe what I witnessed, says Kenny. He changed everyone in that room that night. 200 plus people became part of the solution if they weren't already. Even a privileged girl and a privileged hat with a privileged mindset. Point is, it doesn't matter what you thought before. You can always change. And you can always become part of the critical mass trying to push this forward. All you have to do is care and allow that care to become education and action. End of tweet. So may it be. Let us be educated, but move beyond that and become part of the solution.
And now I invite you, though we extinguish our challenge flame, we carry with us what we kindled. A light of inspiration, the warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out in the world.
I invite you now to join me in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity. And our benediction. Angela Herrera writes, don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy and your passion. Bring your love and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your power to heal. There is work to do, and you have all that you need to do it right here in this room.